So before we launch into looking at this little bean and me talking about why I actually think he's fantastic, I do want to say that because I kind of feel like I need to at this point, I do have a Patreon. It is a single $1 tier. It's the only one I've got. It gets you early access to videos as well as it just supports the channel, which is always nice. But if you would rather not support the channel monetarily or don't have the means, which is also totally understandable, but still want to support the channel, there is also a link down in the description for a Discord server for Show Z, which I've talked about a few times in the past. Show Z is an overseas website that sells a lot of different Transformers figures, mostly third-party, not entirely, but they do have lots of third-party and KO stuff, and turnaround time's pretty great. Got free shipping to the US that actually is pretty quick considering it's free. It's like within 2 weeks or so is the norm for me most of the time. They have fantastic customer service. They've got really good prices on stuff. And I highly encourage that you check them out outside of the whole link thing because it's just a great site. Not actually sponsored, I just have the Discord link. But if you click that Discord link, it earns me 50 points of what amounts to store credit. 50 points is basically like 50 cents. And that all adds up to eventually get me to, I could use that store credit towards purchasing other figures that I could make other videos on. So that is another thing you could potentially do to help out the channel if you want. And with all of that out of the way, let's talk about Studio Series 01, whatever they're calling this, War for Cybertron Bumblebee. Oh, pardon me. War for Cybertron Bumblebee. And I actually really like this little guy. I know he's got his detractors. He definitely has certain visual issues in robot mode, to put it lightly. But I think this little guy is great. As you can see, he's got weapons stored all over him. And I'm not too keen on the guns that he comes with. I don't think they look great. Or rather, I don't think they look great when in use. I think they look fine for what they are. But I like the sword. But as you can see, they can all store. You've got the, whatever this is, chunkier gun back here, sword back here, other gun stores here. What I tend to prefer to do is I just use the sword. And once I finish this video, that, the guns are going back in the box. So, or not back in the box, but in like the storage box that I use. So I like to just store the sword down here, and you can do it. You just slip it in, and there's the tab on the sword that tabs into the spot where the gun tabbed in. And you just line that up and plug it in, and sword stores down there just fine. And then the gun can store up here, much like sword did. Plug that in, and now you're storing both of the guns back there. And the sword does the job of the gun by covering up the robot mode face, so you kind of get everything taken care of. But yeah, that's how I do that. I'm just going to take these off, because I don't really want to keep them stored, and we will look at these more when we get to the robot mode, and I might as well take the sword out too. Going to want to do this for the transformation later anyway, but in case anyone wants to do this, I want to show you there is a pretty easy way to get the sword out when you store it like this. Basically, the trick is to just push down here because it's pegged in up here. So if you push down here, it'll lever that up a little bit, and that gives you space to grab the grip of the sword and pull up, and this will already be partially untapped. So it's just a much easier way to get the sword out of there rather than trying to like dig a finger in there or partially untransform it. So you can get the sword out if you decide to store it down there. Now, the vehicle mode. It's War for Cybertron, and I guess Fall of Cybertron too, actually, Bumblebee. There's this little computer mouse looking thing. We've all seen the Thu video on it, I'm sure. And if not, you should watch it because it's great. But it's a neat little car. I like this Cybertronian vehicle mode for Bumblebee. I think it's cute, and I think it's neat. It's got kind of Tron-esque kind of a feel about it with the lines going through it and just the curvature and the wheels that almost look like they're part of the car rather than being separate. Just got a bit of a light cycle vibe, if like light cycles were a car. And it's also painted pretty well too. You've got the red and black accents all over the place, like the front and the sides. I think these are also meant to be headlights, I don't know. And also along the sides here, there's the black going up along here. The wheels, which I believe the wheels are all gray, and then the yellow is painted, but it works. It looks the part. And then even the rear taillights are painted. So there's a lot of pretty nice paint on this guy. I'm kind of thinking this might also be intended to be black. I don't know for sure, but I think for what we got, there's more than enough on the vehicle mode. Pardon. And the contours on this car are wild. I love that's just like one big curve with like slightly smaller curves going off the side, but then you also have these more harsh angles up along here. It's just a really interesting looking shape. And that weird kind of abrupt cutoff at the front. And it's really, really low too. This thing would not handle speed bumps well, but it's a cool design. I really think this is a fun vehicle. And you've got B all tucked away in there. Now, I did used to own the Generations version of this War for Cybertron Bumblebee back in the day. Not back in the day, like a few years ago, but I wasn't too fond of that figure. I didn't like how the feet didn't really do anything. They just kind of settled in place, so like they rattled around the wheels a lot. The flip-out arm blades, while cool, were, from what I saw, very fragile. Luckily mine didn't break, but I also didn't keep the figure. And like the arm pods were a little bit ridiculous. He had these extremely scrawny limbs and like really weird beefy forearms and a really round chunky body, and like he's definitely got weird proportions in this toy too, but I think the proportions are better, which we'll get to when we get to the actual transformation in the robot mode. But point is, I don't have the Generations figure anymore, and honestly I think this is the better version of War for Cybertron / Fall of Cybertron Bumblebee. I know that the other figure has more going on, bigger, probably heavier, more paint, more engineering, all that stuff. I get that. But I still think this is the better figure. That said, he's a cute little Cybertronian vehicle, and let's just move straight on into the size comparisons, because I feel like all this talk and trying to justify how I feel about the robot mode doesn't really matter when we're looking at the vehicle. So let's bring in Heartfire and Rotor Storm and Burnout and Samus. And in case anyone's been wondering why... Whoa. I bumped the camera big time. I'm sorry about that. But in case anyone's been wondering why I keep using a Samus amiibo in size comparisons, it's because I feel like if anyone's watching these videos and want to get a feel for the size of a figure, even if they're not into Transformers, if they don't collect Transformers, this is something they might have a little bit more context for, because amiibo are pretty prevalent even if someone's not into Transformers. So I just feel like this might be a decent way to get the size across for someone who may not necessarily have anything or anything even approximating the other figures that I'm using for size comparison. I hope that makes sense. So I feel like it's, yeah, I don't think I ever explained that before. It's weird that I'm randomly doing that in a Studio Series Bumblebee video. It's probably going to be viewed by all of like 50 people, but I appreciate the 50 people who watch this. And real quick, while we've just got Burnout up here, you can see B is a little bit smaller than Burnout, and I think that's fine, but it's probably going to bother some folks. I will say, though, B's transformation a little bit more involved than Burnout's, so I feel like, you know, yeah, Burnout is a little bit bigger, but B is a little bit more complicated. So I think it kind of works. And one more before we get to the show proper. Here is Bumblebee with the duck tank. All right, time to transform Bumblebee. And this is interesting. So yeah, you want to take all the weapons off if you haven't already. First thing I'm going to do is untab the trunk. Not really trunk, but back car. Flip that up. And now I'm going to get the legs, and these tab into slots here, but they also tab in here and here, just under these bits here. So what I generally do is kind of push this up to slide it out there. And with that slid out, I can pull it down and out and get those two tabs out of there. With that done, I don't want to straighten out the leg yet, because what you actually want to do is pull this down and then flip this around. And that will give you the room to straighten out the leg. This then swings around and tabs in here. And this folds in and just kind of finishes off what becomes the ankle. And same thing here. Slide that up so that we can pop these out. Fold out the toe. Probably should have folded out the toe first, but whatever. Then swing it around. And might as well swing that around while we're here too. And now we can straighten out the knee, rotate this around, and plug that in. And now the car has legs. And then from here, I'm going to bring this section down. You can kind of lift this section, top of the car, up a little bit. You don't want to lift it too much though, because it does have a tendency to pop off the joint that it's attached to. But lift that up so that you can swing that down. Then straighten out the legs and rotate the waist around. Now the hips, you may notice I'm struggling to move them a little bit. That's because they were a bit loose on mine out of the box, and I tightened them with floor polish, and then they're maybe a little too tight now. That's yeah, but it's fine. I can work around it. Now the arms, they're a little tricky to do, but I found there is actually a pretty straightforward way of getting them taken care of that doesn't require like flexing a bunch of stuff. Basically, this wheel section, like you can see this line here, this is a separate piece from this. So you can rotate this around for the arm, and I find getting this out of this wheel well section is easiest if you rotate it first and pull the arm out, rather than trying to force it out and like around this curve here. So essentially, I want to rotate this down like this. So I'm just gonna pull out a little bit and rotate it down, and that gives us plenty of clearance now to pull the arm down and straighten everything out. And we can just rotate that back up into position, because this is the position it normally is to go in here, but if you try and bring it up like this, you've got to get around this corner here, and it's just kind of a big involved thing. So going back into vehicle mode, it's also easiest to just rotate this down like this, push the arm up into the section where it's supposed to go, and then rotate this back up into position. So little tip for anyone who's got this figure or thinking of getting this figure. Same thing here. You want to pull out just a little bit because it tabs in slightly here. So pull out and then rotate down, and then rotate the arm down, straighten that back out. Now I'm going to push these wheel well sections in a little bit, not all the way, but just enough so that we can pull the arms out. And they, as you can see, sit in there. So pull those out, and they will kind of softly click-ish into place. And that takes care of that. Now, going to, instead of actually going to pull those out again a little bit. Now, instead of pushing down and transforming everything like as you might expect, you want to pull this down a little bit so we can pop this door open. Open that up and get that out of the way. Fold this back, and with this folded back, we want to push this door through. Like it requires some clicking, but push it through the gap there and fold it all the way up so that it sits on the inside here. And now we can push these back in and rotate this down, and this tab here will plug into the slot there. Bring that down and click that into place, and that will line up the whole torso section. This hinges up and just kind of presses up against the back. The shoulder pads actually click down, like so. They don't stick out like that normally. So you want to click those down, and then rotate the arms around. The arm transformation, I think, is pretty cool. It's simple, but it's cool. This rotates up, and this section folds in, and that creates the full forearm look. And I think that's really cool. I love that. It's simple, but very effective. There's even like this little curve here that the wheel fits around. So the wheel can still spin while it's in there. That's neat. And that is it for the transformation. There we have War for Cybertron Bumblebee, Studio Series War for Cybertron Bumblebee in his little Bumbleboy mode, and he is a little weird. I will freely admit that his proportions are a little bit odd. He's got really long legs, kind of a squished up torso, and his arms are beefy, but they're not as chunky as the Generations toy. I like that the arms are actually a little slimmer, like the forearms. This looks more like, you know, armored padding rather than a Popeye thing. And yeah, he looks great. I do have things that I can complain about that I will point out, but for the most part, I actually think he's really cool. I had my misgivings because from some angles he looks a little weird. The torso section looks a little weird, but like in hand, he's actually pretty cool. Yes, definitely the torso is like squunched up and the legs are too long, but it really doesn't bother me, especially considering the fact that, like, you know, as I'm thinking about it, it's like we've got various Transformers figures that have slightly off proportions when you're looking at it from in terms of like general humanoid proportions. And the thing is, it's like, yeah, some of them have proportions that are a little off, and that does look a little strange considering so many of them have what you could consider slightly more regular or standard human-ish proportions. But one, these are all supposed to be individuals, so it makes sense that their proportions might be different because people are shaped differently, so why wouldn't they also be shaped differently? But two, they're alien robots. They don't need to have humanoid proportions because they're not human. So yeah, his torso is a little weird looking, his legs are a little long, but like, so what? That's just what this Bumblebee looks like. It's fine. And really, this guy is really cool. His proportions are weird, but I don't care. I love the look of him. I kind of like how he's got this silly little potbelly thing going. And really, from the waist up, I have no real complaints about this guy. Like, yeah, you could say, oh, he's a little bit hollow around the side if you're looking at him from the right angles and stuff. And like, yeah, but really, on a $25 deluxe with all that this guy has going on, I don't think that's a big deal. It's fine. And again, I said, like, I really like how they did the arms. That's really cool. The thing that does disappoint me about this guy a little bit, the legs could definitely have done with a little bit more work. I'm not bothered by them to anywhere near the degree that most people are, or people that I've seen complaining about them anyway. But they could have used a little bit more work. Like, it's okay. I think it looks fine for what it is. I even actually appreciate the little bits that cover up the ankles and make it look more like the wheels are part of the legs. But I also think it would look better if, you know, the wheels were on the outside, and, you know, when you do it like this, you don't really get an ankle tilt. The ankles move this way for the transformation, so once these are in place, they actually kind of tab in. There's like this little tab there that slots in there, and that kind of, it doesn't really lock him in place, but like he's got an A stance, and that's it. He doesn't really have ankle tilts, even though he has ankle tilts. And also, this joint is on the outside of the leg when it seems like it would make more sense for it to be on the inside. You can see there is what looks to be a wheel molded here, but it's not painted. So there's a lot of bizarre stuff going on with the legs. You can do the thing that a lot of people have shown off and talked about. You actually, because of the geometry involved, you have to unpeg the torso to do this first, but you can rotate the waist around 180 degrees and click the torso back in and rotate the thighs around, and now you get ankle tilts and the spiky bits going to the outside, the car detail going to the outside, the messier detail on the inside. And this, I feel, does work better in that regard. Problem is, when you do it this way, you've got the gaps and visible mushroom pegs on the outsides of the thighs, so now they're facing out, and you've got this void going on in the waist section, and it's not great. Now, you can rotate things around, like you can actually pop the legs off and swap them so that this part is facing forward. But the problem with doing that is the vehicle mode doesn't peg together correctly in the back, because this bit actually needs to line up a certain way to connect into the back here. Like you can kind of see there's this bit back here that kind of sits in there, and it's just, yeah. So with some modification, you might be able to carve things down so that you can do the waist rotation and have things be more like this. If you want to, go right ahead. I personally don't think it's necessary. I feel like he looks fine if he's transformed stock. I do think, I won't deny he does look better like this with the wheels on the outside of the legs and having real proper ankle tilts. And especially these knee spikes on the outside, I think that makes more sense. But the thing is, this doesn't bother me at all. I don't really care about this because I'm not really looking at his crotch, and also because he's got all of this going on, this kind of overhang, you don't really notice. And you still get the waist rotation and all that, so it doesn't really impede anything. So, yeah, I don't know. For the sake of this video, though, I'm going to put him back into his stock configuration because, as I said, it doesn't really bother me. But just acknowledging the fact that that is a thing you can do. And it looks totally fine. I think, it's fine. Now, as with Prime, actually possibly even more extreme than Prime, you don't get a lot of paint with this guy, particularly new paint for robot mode. Prime had paint, maybe not a ton, but he did have it. Bumblebee, I feel like, has more, but he doesn't really get any for robot mode. It's his face and the ends of his forearms, and that's it. The rest of this is all plastic, or details that were painted in vehicle mode already. I don't find that to be a problem, but it is something to point out. So these bits here on the forearm sitting just below the wheel, that is painted yellow, and then the face is painted, and the rest of it is just what we saw in vehicle mode or plastic. Like I said, it doesn't really bother me. But I actually really like this guy, as I said. I think he's cool, and I think it's actually really easy to get him into some cool-looking, almost intimidating and powerful-looking poses, which is kind of funny considering this is Bumblebee. And he's, the tiny fellow. He's, as Stu put it, the Scrappy-Doo of the Autobots. Or the Autobot version of Scrappy-Doo, however he said it. But it's cool, and I like the design of this Bumblebee. I think it's neat. It kind of evokes the friendly little pudgy Kid Appeal character. Not pudgy, but the round boy Kid Appeal character, while also kind of looking like he could mess you up. As I said, he just doesn't really take much to make him look intimidating. Now, as I mentioned briefly, there is the head, and that is a very nice Bumblebee looking head. He's got the classic G1 style Bumblebee noggin, which is a little rounded. He's got the horns, he's got that little curvy thing in the front there. The fun little silver face, nice bright blue eyes. He looks, well, he kind of looks friendly, but at the same time, when you look at him with everything else, he kind of looks not friendly, which it's kind of interesting. Yeah, I think he looks good. I can't even necessarily say he's missing paint. I feel like all he really needs is the silver for the face and then the eyes being painted. As you can see, the head is on a ball joint, so you get a little teeny tiny bit of back and forth, but then you can look up and down and rotate. I'm actually wondering, now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if rotating the head around would make a difference for vehicle mode. I'll have to try that sometime. The arms can go in and out, but unfortunately, because of the shape of everything going on here, they can't really go out further than this. You can kind of angle the arm to bring them out further, so it is doable, but you do have to be mindful because like this bit basically bangs into that. I kind of feel like they didn't necessarily need to have this much plastic back here, I don't think. So I feel like if that was rounded off more or just kind of cut off a little bit, like about like that, it would give you just enough space to really bring the arm out, and I think that would have been preferable, but oh well. And because the arm is on a ball joint, you can get a little bit of butterfly motion, and because of the transformation, you can use that too for a little bit of butterfly motion. You get a bicep swivel, you get 90 degrees of bend. The fists don't rotate, but you can curl them in if you want, but it breaks the sculpt. As we saw, you get a waist rotation. It doesn't go all the way around because the hip bangs into this little bit of the flap that sticks down. So if you want to go around more, you have to unplug the torso, but you can do it. The hips are on ball joints, and as I mentioned in the video, I tightened those ball joints with floor polish, and now they're a little bit more snug than I would like, but they still move and they're not like breaking anything, so they can move forward a little bit. Oh, I need to zoom out. A little bit under 90 degrees just because of what's going on up here. Move back to pretty much 90, a little bit under 90. And go out that far, so not quite 90 there. You get a thigh swivel. You get a knee that bends. The knees are a thing, so the knee bends to 90. You can bend a little further, but the problem is, I will say, the design of the legs is actually really clever because you can see there is this gap here, and yeah, that gap's unsightly or whatever, but it's there for a reason. Because when you bend the knee, you can see this bit actually goes inside that gap. So that gap is there, both, I'm assuming, to cut back on plastic use, but also it's there so that you can actually bend the knee because of this piece there. Only problem is if you bend the knee too far, it will pop this bit apart. And then suddenly this is flopping around. And you can do it. If you disconnect it, you can curl it in a little bit more, but then it doesn't really line up right. So just something to be aware of. If you're going to bend the knee, maybe pinch here where it plugs in and bend the knee until it stops and just leave it there rather than try to push it any further. And as established, if you have the legs in this configuration, you don't get any ankle tilts, or you can use ankle tilt to the outside, but that's it. But if you rotate everything around, you can use this as an ankle tilt. And you can also use the transformation joint for the toe to go down, and you can't really go up with this bit in the way, but if you move it out of the way, you can go up too. So he's actually pretty darn posable for what he is. And I still maintain you don't really need to do the rotate the waist and legs around thing to get the ankle tilts, but I can appreciate that the option is there. Now for the accessories, he has his guns, like this little thing and this other little chunkier thing. And just like with Optimus Prime, you pull his arm off and it just slides off, and you can see there's the peg hole, there's the peg, and it is keyed in a certain way where like one part is flat. That's the top part of the peg, so it can only go in the one way. But unplug that, and then the guns, the peg holes are not keyed, so you can plug them in however you want, really. I don't really know which way is the right way with this particular gun. Like, this looks like it could be right, but this also looks like it could be right. I just don't know. Kind of prefer this because it puts the storage tab on the inside. But like, that looks okay, but it's really thin, and it's kind of small, and I'm just not really feeling it. This one, it's more of the same. Like, I don't really know what angle it's supposed to peg in at. And this one is, I like this gun even less than the other one. It just kind of looks like his forearm's been replaced with like a mace, and not even a really cool looking mace. It's just kind of a chunk. I know this is a gun. I'm just saying it looks like a mace, and I just don't really care for that either. So generally, what I do with this guy is I just don't use the guns. I have them in my little parts storage section, and I just give him a sword. Because I think the sword is cool. I think, we don't generally see Bumblebee with a sword that often. It was what? Transformers Prime? Arguably the Unicron trilogy, because Hotshot was supposedly kind of like Bumblebee, but it wasn't actually Bumblebee. I don't know. But I think it's cool. I think Bumblebee with a sword is neat. It's something you don't expect. Now, the problem also that I have with Bumblebee versus Prime with this weapon thing is you can't really store the forearm anywhere. If you pop it off, it just goes off to the side. There's no actual place to store this, but you can cheat it. I've found that if you have him holding the sword, you can just plug the sword into his back and his hand will just hang off of it. It's not ideal, but you can do that. And then you can give him his, one of his other guns. And if you want, there's still, I think, just enough room. Maybe not. Maybe not. No, okay, there's just enough room to peg the other gun on there like this. So you can have him with all of his gear stored. But I do not like the guns for this, and I do not like the fact that you can't peg the hand or arm in anywhere unless you do this. And unfortunately, because the other guns have to swap out for the forearm, if you want to store the arm like that, you can't use the sword, because that's the only thing you can hold that'll plug in there. So yeah, could be better. I don't think this is quite as bad as Prime, because at least he can store his weapons in robot mode, but this could have been better in terms of how they handled the weaponry and all that. But I will say, he's pretty darn stable. You can already see, like, he's got all of this going on in the back, and like, he's not going to just fall over. He is pretty darn stable. So I appreciate that. Anyway, I think I have talked more than long enough with all that, so let's move on to size comparisons so we can wrap this video up, because my voice is starting to go, and you can probably hear that. There is Artfire, and Rotor Storm, Mastodon, Triceratops, and Burnout, and Samus. And you can see even in robot mode, Bumblebee is a little bit on the small side. I mean, a lot of it on the small side. But, I mean, like, okay, let's get Artfire out of the equation here, because he's a Voyager. Let's get Samus out of here. And here we've kind of got the, I guess, all of the extremes when it comes to modern deluxes. You've got the really tall deluxe, the average deluxe, and then the short deluxe. And, you know, I think I keep Rotorstorm in here because I feel like he's just a great, vibrant, wonderful figure anyway. But also, it's, you know, he's a tall deluxe, so I feel like this paints a picture of what a larger deluxe would look like next to whatever figure we're looking at any given video. Burnout is much more average size, and yeah, even then you can see that next to Burnout, B is a bit short. Not something that I think is a negative on the figure, really, but he is short. I do feel like the amount of paint and engineering that went into this guy and the fact that he comes with 2 weapons that I don't really care for, I think all of that does factor into it. But just something to be aware of, I guess. I mean, again, he's Bumblebee, so he's always going to be a little bit on the tiny side. And he's not exactly like this. I don't have War for Cybertron. What was it, Siege? No, it was Earthrise. I don't have Earthrise Cliff Jumper or any version of that mold anymore, but I'm pretty sure he's still bigger than that. And well, it's just because. I know we didn't look at him in vehicle mode, but just because. Here is Studio Series War for Cybertron Bumblebee with Studio Series War for Cybertron Optimus Prime. And, you know, you've got Beefy Voyager, not necessarily Tall Voyager, Beefy Voyager, Small Deluxe, but I think that works. Like, I think this is probably a big reason why this Bumblebee is the size he is. Anyway, let's wrap this up because I need some water. So there we go. There we have Studio Series 01, whatever, Bumblebee with the duck tank. And that'll do it for this Bumblebee. As I've said many times already, I actually really like this guy. He is not perfect by any means. He's a little bit fiddly, like not fiddly, he's just very particular in terms of the transformation. There are certain things you have to do a certain way in a certain order, and if you don't, it's just not going to work. Or something might pop off. Like, I must have popped, in transformation, I must have popped this back panel off, this one here, like, probably 4 or 5 times at this point. So there is that. But I don't really mind it. And again, I just think he's cool. Like, I honestly didn't like this design for Bumblebee in the Generations toy, but I really like it here. Even though he's got some slightly wonky proportions and some weird design decisions, like the mess being on the outside of the legs and the ankle tilts not working unless you reverse the waist and the thighs, and like the kind of weird pushed in, pinched in, hollow, but also not potbelly thing he's got going on. Even with all that stuff, I think this guy looks really cool, and I think the proportions on this are better than the Generations toy. It works for Bumblebee. It is a neat Bumblebee. I really like this. And I'm shockingly glad I got him. I was not expecting that. I got him because I watched a few videos on it and was like, you know, that actually looks pretty cool. That transformation actually looks really interesting. And it's way less of a hassle than the Generations toy. And then I got him and was actually smitten. He is a cute but also really neat figure that does some really cool things with the transformation. He's weirdly restricted with his articulation in some regards, but also has some really good articulation in others. He's highly customizable in the sense that you can swap the, rotate the hips and rotate the legs, or rotate the hips, rotate the waist around, and like change up how this whole section looks. But yeah, I really like this guy. And again, I will say this one more time. What they did with these forearms is brilliant. I love that transformation, and Bumblebee with a sword looks cool. But that is enough about what I think. What do you all think of the new Studio Series War for Cybertron Bumblebee and the other War for Cybertron Studio Series figures that we've gotten? As much as I like the look of Barricade, I really have a problem with the weird saddlebags and the fact that he has no heel support at all and like weirdly restricted articulation. But he looks cool. And I'm also curious, what are your hopes for Studio Series War for Cybertron stuff? And possibly Fall of Cybertron stuff? Because I would love, I mean, obviously I would love it if Hasbro and Takara took another crack at the High Moon Studios Dinobots. Would absolutely love that. And the Insecticons. But personally, I'm actually really hoping we get a Studio Series War for Cybertron or Fall of Cybertron Jazz. I really like Jazz's design in Fall of Cybertron. And I didn't have that big a problem with the Generations toy, but it definitely could have been better. And I really think it'd be cool if they did another pass at that. I would also love it if they finally gave us Warpath. Warpath's design from War for Cybertron was really cool, and we never got a toy of that. So fingers crossed we actually do get that. I mean, I'm not banking on it, but, fingers crossed. But anyway, whatever your thoughts on this figure or any of the other stuff that I just rambled about for a few more minutes because this video isn't long enough, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. Thank you, everybody. I apologize to all of you for having to watch this or listen to this because I don't edit anymore. But thank you, everybody, again for watching. And once again, I don't have a proper outro, so thanks. I don't know what the next figure is going to be, and bye.